So questions, thoughts, we've got a little bit of time. If the clock is, oh yeah, it's right now. Yes.
So, how do you balance that concept of like, yay, you're frustrated, and also, I mean, especially when you're homeschooling multiple kids, trying to make sure like they're on track for getting those foundational things. I mean, time is working against us, right?
Yes.
And so I love this, but I also know my own fear of like, I want to make sure that they like by the end of the year get what they need for this grade.
Right.
You know? So talk to me a little bit about that.
It isn't every day, and it's not every lesson that this would fit. Because it only is going to be those times when it's some kind of a concept that we can push back on and work on. And so often I see it working well when it is in when it's in an area where there's some crossover. So in a writing where we're talking about something maybe that we've learned in history or science, or you've read a piece in Reader's Choice, or you've read one of the I'm blanking on the right word, the common, but is that what it's labeled? Where it's like a nonfiction, and so there's an article that you have to read and then you need to respond to. If there's something in there where there's a conversation to be had and you dig in deeper for their understanding, it could be an area that they're interested in where they're willing to dig in a little bit deeper. I would say, in my mind, as starting out, I would look at a week and pick one lesson for the week for each of my kids that I thought, I think that is an area where I could do something with that.
Okay.
Or as it comes up in a as I'm teaching or they're doing their work, like that math example of mine, like, okay, I see there's something here that I don't think you quite understand. Just asking those questions, and maybe you don't have time to go in deep right there, but at least you're like, hey, I think this is an area that we need to learn a little bit more about. Let's set it aside, and we're going to come back to it. So it could pop up with us having it in the back of our head. In general, if it's something that you want to embrace, I would have a conversation away from a school day, but have a conversation about it and look at it and talk through. I mean, I don't know what ages, I forgot to ask that at the beginning, what grades everybody's kids are at. But it could be a great place to start as well.
Would you say this works better for a certain age, or when they get to a certain grade and up?
I don't think so. I think that you can do it with any age. Like I said, they'll do this with preschoolers. So, I mean, obviously the graphics and the words would look really different. But yeah, it can be any age. It's really helping students be aware of what's going on while they're learning is a big part of it, and them being okay with I don't already know it. It's amazing to me how many, I go to all campuses and I'll ask students, what are you learning? And the progress that I've seen as a school, when I can ask them, and how will you know that you've learned it? I have lots of schools now where the teachers have done a lot of this work with them, and they can say, I've got this, this, and this, but I don't get that, that, and that. That is a huge step forward for our students to be able to be okay with saying that to a practical stranger and to identify those things. So it's really great. And even the little guys can tell me as well as the high schoolers. Yeah.
I have a question. So like here we're learning about this, the concept's like super interesting. There's like this really neat video and it makes sense to me as an adult, but I'm kind of thinking ahead to my kids. I have one that's very motivated and I could like lay this out with her and she'd be like, got it, Mom. And then the other one, I'm like, how does it look to teach this to kids without the video, without the...
Yeah, the video wouldn't really work because it's very cognitive.
Well, it's,
for adults.
That's geared for adults,
right.
I understand, but I could see me being like, okay, kids, like, this is the thing we're going to do, and totally just fumbling it and making it even more confusing for my kid, that this would actually probably help them most.
I don't know that you actually have to
because the kids here are talking about the pit, so
They
have
are,
been
and
taught
they've
the
labeled it, but you've got to create that. So that's like looking at this next week of lessons, or the week after that. Give yourself some time and looking at, like, okay, I want to. This is an area that I know there's going to be some issues here, or there's a great concept that we can talk about, and I like the tourist idea, and I can push on them and ask them some challenging questions to get them to the place of, oh, I don't really know. What do I do now?
Right.
Oh, okay, well, let's look for some resources. Let's look for, you can facilitate the whole process, and then when you get here, tell me about what that was like, and you give them labels then. You don't give them labels ahead of time.
Okay, so
you give them labels later.
So just go through the process without using this, and then after we've had that success, then okay, let's parallel this.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's, we could call that the pit. You're like, you were in the pit, you're like struggling in the pit, right?
Okay.
You can give them all of those labels later.
Okay.
And older kids, you can give them labels ahead, but you're younger. But that's fine. If they're not there, it doesn't matter. But I think experiencing it is super important, because that makes a connection for them. Some kids, they want to understand this and they'll make the connections as they go, and others, they need to experience and then they can make connections. So you can work either direction.
Okay.
And you know your students or your kids well enough to know that. That's huge.
That's helpful. Thank you.
What else? Yeah.
It's not so much a question as a concern, is that, like, in the classroom settings, the kids are always bouncing ideas off each other. They have a lot more input and stuff. But
Yes.
the homeschool setting is just more of a one-on-one, and we're the only ones that they bounce their
Right.
So how do we make sure that we're not pulling them out of the pit because we have all the answers? I don't want them to get stuck in the pit because there's nobody else to bounce ideas off of. But
Right.
I don't want to be the one that builds the bridge for them to get out of the pit.
Exactly. I think that is a dance that we will always struggle with. You know, I think that is the definite challenge that will be before us. And you're just going to get better when you personally reflect over it, like, oh, I totally did that. Oh, yeah, next time I got to do that. I think you're going to be in the pit with this for a while and learning how to do it yourself as well, because it's just our natural inclination. And they know you know the answers. So that's building their resources. Other than asking me, where else can you go? Right? And giving them that idea of, let's go on, this website. Why don't you see what you can find there? Let's go back to that book that we had. Where else can you go? Oh, my teacher talked about whatever. Yeah, so it's pushing back a little bit. Like, you go find some things and then let's talk about it. But yeah, it is challenging when it's just that one-on-one kind of environment. Yeah.
You could also have them, like, call a grandparent or call aunt and uncle, or just to have like another face to talk to. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's like if your kids are in A or B or in selectives where they've got some other friends that might be doing the same lessons or in the same sequence, you can definitely have that conversation as well. Okay, let's reach out to so and so. What else?
I was thinking that the child has to be already in a stable environment and have a really good foundation before you tackle. Like, I don't know, I'm looking at more from the perspective of maybe the child's not, if they're going through, parents are going through a divorce, you have other things going on, you could really make a child very frustrated and not. Am I right in thinking that? I don't know if my thought process is right on this, because I see some negatives to it. I do see lots of positives, but there's some things that I'm not too sure.
And I think that goes back to when I was talking earlier, like, the student, your kids well. I, as a classroom teacher, need to get to know my kids well. And honestly, even though there's 20 of them, it doesn't take long before I keep pointing at you. You're going to be my sensitive, like, I'm going to touch base with you like 5 times, and I'm going to come by once. You learn that about a student, you learn about them rather quickly in a classroom setting, and I can pair the two of you up, but I can't pair the two of you up. Because you're going to be like, no, you're wrong, whatever, right? So that's on me building that culture in my classroom where this is a safe place. There are amazing schools with kids who are coming with all kinds of trauma from their backgrounds, and school is the safest place for them to be, and they engage in this because they know that teachers built that trust and their peers, and we've worked on creating that culture. it's a culture shift even in your house if you've been about, it's done, it's right, we're moving on.
Yeah.
And I want to shift to, well, let me ask you some questions about this. But I've already done it.
Yeah.
It's right. I know, but I'm just going to ask you a couple questions, right? It is a shift, but I think that it is, I think you're right. You build the trust, you build the culture, you build those things in for this to work well.
Yeah, because I wouldn't want my child crying in front of the kids in class, because it won't be a positive
Nope.
thing coming home.
Right.
And I do have a sensitive son.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you would respond that way, but I'm just saying, like, it would definitely mean the teacher has to make a very safe environment,
Yes,
because
definitely.
everyone wants to feel, you know,
Yeah,
that they're
and it's
intelligent in
a
some way.
beautiful
Right.
thing to see that if your son gets frustrated and your daughter's there and she's like, don't worry, I've been here before. How can I help you? That is what happens in this kind of environment in a classroom. They all know what it's like to be there. They've all been there. They come alongside. They know, like, hey, it's good. You're going to be fine. And they give them resources. They can help. They work together. And I think that's the advantage you're talking about that's in the classroom that makes this work really, really well. And at home, it can be more of a challenge because I'm the only one they get to do that with.
So are the teachers going to start incorporating this in the classroom? Are they already? Or when is this going to be applied?
Teachers, we have done training on this in the 2 years ago,
Okay.
so they've all been exposed to it. I don't know here at this campus that I've got anyone where they've got like an actual pit up in the classroom, but the concept of we don't want to just give kids the answers, we want them to struggle with the concept, we want them to work towards this, and that there is a, what's the right word? Productive struggle. That's the word I was looking for earlier, the phrase. Productive struggle is super important and very valuable. That is something that they're all incorporating into their teaching and have been
I think
for a
some,
while.
like, it's interesting you said that some parents pave the way. My kid has had all the struggles, so this is not like, so I have to be careful that I don't frustrate him more
Yeah,
versus,
definitely.
and I love the idea about the thinking process.
Right.
And then Eureka obviously works for everyone, right? We
Right.
all like that feeling.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be for you choosing very carefully where you want to try that and where you want to push and ask them questions that
So more on confident areas, like the areas that he's really strong in, and then
it could be.
bring it out for new thought process.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Have you thought about this? Like, I mean, the tourist example at the very beginning is a great one because they're like, yeah, we know what a tourist is. And then he just asked a few questions and they're like, oh, maybe we don't know what a tourist is.
Yeah, I think it depends on the concept you pick. Because, like,
Yep.
if I said to my daughter, like, maybe 5's not an odd number, she would just be, like, devastated. As if I said it to my son, he'd be like, oh, that's kind of cool, why not? Like, he would, you know, so I think, like, I have to really pick, like, where to start with my daughter to, like, start challenging things that could easily be challenged, like the tourist thing.
Yeah.
But if I started with something that's, like, a fact and let's break it down, she would, like, the concept would terrify her, you know, but I think if you do it slowly over time with things that are easier to break down and then start challenging more, so.
They get used to that idea and they're not afraid of it anymore.
Yeah.
And his other example about a capital city, right? Like, what's the capital of France? Paris, but what makes it a capital city? Oh, okay, wow, let me think about that. Like, just opening them up and then, like, coming back to what you were saying, then you label it for them.
Right.
Like, okay, so how did that feel? Like, oh, I was curious. Maybe one of your kids is curious. The other one would be like, I don't know. Let me find the answer and be done. But, you know, that curiosity, you can label those things for them, and that helps them. I think it's super important that we give kids labels for all of the things going on in their lives.